There we go. So welcome to this episode with me, Martin Fredson, running Welledge in the Old Town. And with me today, I have Dr. Rob Sinnott again. And it's an honor again, giving you your time to, with all the knowledge you have. And last time we spoke more about the science part of chiropractic, which is, I mean, you're so strong on that part, the science part, and the art. And now today, the foundation, the philosophy of chiropractic and principle base of living. And I'm so much looking forward to this hour with you and your fountain sitting from the fountainhead. We have in the background.
I always like I like this background. I just think it's so appropriate to have the, you know, some people that all chiropractors have a degree of respect for, no matter their viewpoint. You have to respect what the Palmer you know, BJ and Dee Dee and Mabel and some of that, you know, the early chiropractic thought was to get us where we are today. So, you know, it's appropriate no matter what to have them in the background. But I hope they would, of course, approve of what I'm about to say, because you never know.
I'm sure they would. I'm sure they would.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. I'm glad to do this. You know, I think it's important for us to share our understanding, because, you know, someone may have a way of explaining something that just clicks with me, and it says, boy, that is something that I could use in my practice to help me explain a point better than maybe an explanation that I'm using. You know, there was a time when I talked about how, you know, a subluxation, what it does to your nerve system, it's kind of like that stereo knob when it's just a little bit out of tune, you know. No one knows what a stereo knob is anymore, so you know, you have to upgrade with the times. So, but you know, we did talk a lot about science last time, but really all we talked about was philosophy and the support science has for it. Really, so you know, a lot of people would watch that and not even catch that it's loaded with philosophy. But that was really the point for me, is to show how everything is philosophy. You can't really get into the understanding of technique without understanding the why behind the technique. And what are we trying to accomplish? Why do we need to make sure there's a subluxation there? What does it matter? Why don't we just go, that doesn't feel right, and blast it? You know, I mean, you know, it's, so there's a little bit of that, but I put a little PowerPoint together to kind of cover some of the ways we think differently than I hate to say medical thought, because it makes it sound like that we're anti-medicine, and I'm not. Not at all. They do their job. We do our job. We're not in the same field. I just had a patient. I'm just finishing the morning here. It's about 11. We finished a little early today for this, but I had someone about an hour ago say to me, "Oh, I need you to fix me." And I said, "Well, I don't do that." And I know. And I said, "Well, you know, here's the thing. If I fix you, then I get the credit. And the reality is your body knows what needs to be done. I remove an interference, your body does. You know, I help remove that interference. Your body does the real important work and you know, takes care of your problem for you." And she said to me, "You know, I really like that. I really like that way of thinking." And I'm thinking, it's just the way healing works, and it's not a chiropractic thought. What it is, it's how the body heals, and all that science we talked about last time all agrees with that. It's not a chiropractic view. We have that view, but you know, the fact that the body heals itself. Galen, the philosopher, not Galen Price, Galen, the ancient philosopher, said, I think he said, "I healed the wound, God heals it," or something like that. But what he was saying is, I don't do the healing. You know, putting a cast on a fracture isn't what heals the fracture. The body does that, you know. So anyway, okay, well, I'll go ahead and share my, I got to find my screen here. Host disabled screen sharing. I have to get screen sharing, if you would.
There we go.
Okay, let me see here. Boop. Oh, here we go. All right, so I'll just be a little picture in the corner now here, which is probably more preferable for everyone anyway. And
you're always good looking.
Well, and I have anti-glare glasses for the screen, because it just helps me take the tone down a little bit. I don't normally wear these sunglass looking things in practice. I don't wear glasses, but so what I want to talk about is how philosophy is part of not only our practice, but it's how it feeds into the way we think and how it affects everything in our life, really. And I'm easy to get a hold of if anybody has a question or something through either Facebook, of course, you can message me, or my email address, which is chirobooks, CHIROBOOKS at SBCglobal, GLOBAL.net. So either one of those work. Facebook's pretty easy. You can do that.
And I will put those down underneath in the
Oh, great.
additional as well.
Great, because I'm happy to share any understanding I have, because our goal, all of us, is to understand chiropractic better and be a little bit better today than we were yesterday. And that's my goal as well. So why won't this go? Okay, there we go. Okay. What better way to start than to talk about probably my greatest mentor, Dr. Barge. I was fortunate enough to work with him quite a bit in his last few years when he was at the school in Davenport. We spent a lot of time together in the LCP class, the first year of the philosophy diplomate, and then the diplomate class that started and didn't finish before he had passed on. But everyone has heard this quote, a great profession can only be sustained through authentic transmission of principles from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of important to understand that idea of authentic transmission, because we hear occasionally some people, and I've done this myself, said, well, our philosophy is good, but this one thing here, that can't be right. And what I always find is that it's because of something I misunderstood that I thought something was wrong. So after all these years of running around in our philosophy looking for problems, there are very few things that I've ever found that really need to be addressed at that level. So, to give that to the next generation of chiropractors is going to offer them the success, not only in practice, but in quality of life, really, because if what you do isn't part of what you are, in your understanding of how life in general works, it makes it difficult in practice. So it really has to be one thing. Now, most people haven't heard of anhedonia. It's a medical diagnosis that I think is appropriate in parts of our profession. I'm trying to move this screen around so I can get out of my own way. There we go. And this is something I had written a while back. Too many chiropractors, and when I refer to the small c kind, I mean the kind that aren't really the chiropractors in name only, so to speak, suffer from anhedonia. It fits our profession. It says, while there are to be pitied, I'm truly concerned for those that wander into them seeking chiropractic and receive at best a diluted version. If what we do as chiropractors does not excite you, please go find something else to do. Anhedonia in chiropractic is secondary to an educational infection of mixed purpose. And that's what I'm saying. It has to be more than just a philosophy that we just apply to our practice. And it's not something that's ingrained in us and becomes part of our life. Because it gives us a mixed purpose, and you're going to have conflict in yourself that way, instead of 100% chiropractic mentality. Now, anhedonia, there is an ICD-10 code for that, if anybody wants to know that. And it's the inability to experience pleasure due to impairment or dysfunction of normal psychological or neurobiological mechanisms. I think it fits. I really do think it fits. We all know chiropractors that we think at times just aren't enjoying what they do as chiropractors. And if we're not enjoying it, it's because we don't understand or we don't, we have internal conflict over what we see and what we do and what we really think is true. And we need to resolve those things to move on from this.
Yeah.
So once we have that opportunity to take a left or a right, and that opportunity as chiropractors is to understand what it means to be a chiropractor and what makes us different than everything else in healthcare. We have that opportunity, and we can take that right turn and take that opportunity for what it's worth. And Didi did that, of course, in 1895, 127 years ago. Now, when he began this profession, it really began with that first question of our philosophy, which is, what Didi wrote in 1910. One question was always uppermost in my mind in my search for the cause of disease. I desired to know why one person was ailing, and his associate eating at the same table, working in the same shop at the same bench was not. Why?
Yeah.
What difference was there in the two that persons that caused one to have pneumonia, catarrh, typhoid, or rheumatism, while his partner similarly situated escaped? Why? And what he's asking there isn't why is this person sick? He's saying, why is this person healthy?
Mm.
Because in Didi's views of health and disease, he said disease is not an entity, it's not a thing of enmity. And what he means by that, fighting disease is a fool's game. We saw during the COVID era, which I suppose in some way we're still dealing with in as a culture, but what did they say on television? They're fighting a virus. And all I could picture in my head is Don Quixote in the windmill, because how do you fight a thing that's not even real? I mean, the virus is real, but you can't fight COVID. It doesn't work like that. What you have to do is from a scientific point of view, building their internal resistance made the most sense. In the beginning of COVID, you'll remember they talked about how it's affecting people with long-term health problems, and they're overweight and they're out of shape, and all of this. So here in my town, almost immediately the bike trail they have was loaded with people walking all over the place because they thought, I don't want to die, I have to get in better health. And that was the right answer. But then they came out in early 2020 and they said, we're working on a vaccine. Go sit down and relax. Don't worry about it. So everybody said, oh, thank God, pass me the donuts. And they waited for someone to fight the disease. And they were doing the right thing by improving their own internal resistance, which is key. And I have data of some medical diagnosis like cystic fibrosis, where you have serious immune function tied to it with these lung bacteria, showing what happens through chiropractic care. So there's not a real mystery. And we hear, I know that WFC, I think it was a WFC, one of those lettered groups, was very upset and we weren't supposed to talk about immune function and tie it to chiropractic. It's absolutely absurd. I have a lot of data here in my practice. I have 11 EKGs. I do a lot of research work, and I can show the data, which they can't show, that shows that that a chiropractic adjustment made massive changes in the ability to adapt, and that's every system in the body. It's not just cardiovagal. The way we can do this math today, we can show that it affects every system in the body, and that includes the neuroimmune system. So, when Didi was looking for the WFC, the reason they didn't want us to talk about it is because they've been taking our money for decades, and they didn't do any of this research. They didn't answer this very first question of Didi's. They didn't even try. Did they show that it was our philosophical viewpoint on this question is wrong? Did they show that they have a study that showed the opposite? Did they no, they have nothing, because they didn't do it. They're obsessed with fifth lumbar pain or whatever it might be. And I know no one watching this has ever seen a study on fourth lumbar. So are we not to touch a fourth lumbar because there's no studies on fourth lumbar? There's only studies on fifth lumbar. So hey, you're all practicing witchcraft with the rest of the spine. It's absolutely absurd. The level of anti-science view that some people have. There's some good research people in our profession. I'm certainly not putting everyone in one basket, but the idea that we can't discuss what the level of research that has been done is the highest level of research available, and it does support this point. So I digress slightly, so I apologize for that.
No,
but
that's great.
Here's the thing: medicine looks at the average. They want everybody to be 120 over 80. And, the average male is, I don't know, but let's say they're 5'7". Well, then, if you're not 5'7", there's something wrong with you. If you're not 98.6, there's something wrong with you. Or 37 degrees, I believe, is the Celsius. If you're not 120 over 80 blood pressure, there's something wrong with you. Well, if you're an 85-year-old woman with 120 over 80, I will argue the point that your blood pressure is probably too low, because your blood vessels can't expand like they used to let that puff of that little pump of blood through. They're more rigid. So to get the same volume through a more rigid vessel, you have to turn up the pressure.
Yeah.
And so as we age, our blood pressure goes up a little bit, and they lose their minds because we're not 120/80. So then these 80-year-old people, they sit around their house because they're tired and they just don't feel like doing anything anymore. Of course, they're oxygen deprived in a sense. You know, their tissue cells aren't getting nutrients in and waste removed at the rate they should because they've turned the pressure down. It's just a point of logic, and science supports it. The Park study that was done used the Framingham data, and they were able to show that, mathematically speaking, I'm not saying this is what it should be, but mathematically speaking, what they showed is that in the Framingham data, which was thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, that the systolic blood pressure, the higher number, should be your age, 120 plus your age at the highest. So if you're 80 years old, they're saying 200 before you get medicated. Now, I'm not saying we should be telling people that necessarily, but there has never been a study done that doesn't support what they're saying in that study. And they were shocked, and they didn't even want to report that data because it sounded so crazy. But when they looked at the Framingham data and applied those numbers turned out to be exactly the case. So, you know, we do have ways of looking at things. And as chiropractors, we look at the individual person, that individual case sitting there. They're different. We're like snowflakes in that sense. We're theoretically different. I don't mean the way they use the word snowflake today as a pejorative to attack each other. I mean, in a positive way. We see that individual person, and if something is wrong, it's a disturbance in the natural balance of their body. Something is not providing what it should be providing, the totality of the body, or it's providing too much in some cases. You know, BJ said a tissue cell can only do two things. It can only do what it's supposed to do, too much or too little. That's all it can do. You know, a muscle cell in your heart isn't going to start doing what the pancreas does. It just doesn't work that way. So we also see that it's crucial to look at that individuality of a person, because they're different. It's normal to have variances. You don't have to be 120/80. You don't have to be 5'7" or 5 foot, whatever the average is. You don't have to be 98.6 or 37 Celsius. You know, and the results of the individual are key. It matters more what's going with that person than when it does as a group. And we're the soil people in that argument. We all, you know, every person that comes to see us has heard of Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur, if you look up his grave, he is in a marble room with gold leaf, and his coffin sits up on a marble altar, and it's just this, whoa, you know. And when I was in France last time, in Paris, I went to see Claude Bernard's grave.
Yes.
Well, actually, we went to see Jim Morrison's grave, but he's in the same graveyard. And so we went to see Claude Bernard, and he wasn't where he was supposed to be. He was about 100 yards from where the map said he was. And I had to climb over other graves and read stones just to find him. And it was unkempt. It looked terrible. There were dead plants and old things that looked like they've been sitting there for years. There's no altar. There's no marble. There's no gold leaf. Now, Claude Bernard is the one that said, you know, where Louis Pasteur said, it's the seed. Disease is a seed. You know, we need to address the seed. The seed's the problem. And Claude Bernard, who was his teacher in medical school and far more, if you look into Claude Bernard, brilliant physician, brilliant mind. He said that it's the resistance. It's the seed doesn't set in the soil unless the soil will receive it. So that's what Didi was talking about. Disease is not the entity. You know, health is the entity. The health of that soil determines whether or not that seed is going to germinate and grow. So, and unfortunately, science has disagreed with Pasteur now. And the reality is Claude Bernard was right. They're not going to get rid of his beautiful thing, or, you know, he was given a stamp here in the United States and from the post office, and Claude Bernard gets nothing. You know, it's sad. Anyway, they deal with universal norms like we talked about, 120/80, you know, 37 degrees Celsius, and science creates these norms. You know, they decide what normal is. The body can't do that. We look at the disturbance of that natural balance. They say, well, there isn't a balance because we've decided what they should be. You know, the individuality isn't crucial. What's crucial in medicine is that their authoritative source, which is themselves. The individual patient is less important. What's more important is how we have studies that show that, you know, these 250 people, this is what happened in this study. So, you know, so this medication, let's say, or this surgery, whatever it might be, has a 70% success rate. Well, okay, which group does this next person go in?
Yeah.
We don't know that. You can't say, well, 70% of them goes in this group. It doesn't work like that. Which group does this person go in? That's why the individual is so important, because we can't apply those statistics to a case. It doesn't work like that. You know, any variation from what they determine is normal is abnormal. You know, that it needs to have something done. So if you are running for the bus and your heart rate gets above what they consider to be normal, well, that's abnormal. Well, he's running for a bus. Oh, well, maybe that's not abnormal. What should it be when you run for a bus? Well, we haven't done that study, so we really don't know. You know what I mean? It's crazy. The results of the average are what's important, not the individual. And they're the seed people. They're the Louis Pasteur group, you know. But of course, society puts them in the marble room with the marble altar with the gold leaf. I mean, that's where medicine is. And it's you know, they have a role. If you have a part broken off, if you have a hole where it's not supposed to be, you know, those types of things, that's what medicine is for. They are brilliant in emergency care and critical care. They're brilliant at that. But what they're not brilliant at is health. Going into taking a child in for just a healthy child visit. They don't even know what that is. That's just to give them another vaccine. They'll measure their head or something weird like that. But you can look at a child and tell if there's something wrong with the shape of their. It's just it gets a little absurd sometimes. It's kind of whether we view things as chaos or order. You know, chiropractic sees order, where an allopathic view is more of a anything that's not those numbers is chaos. There's something going wrong. You know, every country in the world has this going on right now. We have, you know, this person sitting looking at all their medications that they take. You know, they look through the microscope of chaos at someone and say, well, your blood pressure is too high or your cholesterol is too high. And no matter what the studies are saying today, that some of those things don't matter as much as they thought they did, nothing's going to change because their education comes through the drug salespeople. I mean, I hate to say that. We have medical doctors that come in here and they complain about the way they have to practice all the time. We had a cardiologist told Gail my wife at the front desk, I am so jealous of the way you practice. You can do whatever you think is right. I can't do that. And it's like, what? You know, what kind of crazy thing? And he told her, he said, if I do what you do, I'll lose hospital privileges and that'll kill my practice. So that's the difficulty they're in. Even when they see that there's something they'd like to change, they can't. So we're very fortunate as chiropractors that we can choose to have a better understanding, and this requires an outside in instead of an inside out approach. You know, an outside in approach is like you give someone a medication, you put something into the body, something needs to change your function, whether it's a surgery or whether it's a medication or whatever it might be, or even exercise for that matter. You know, Dr. Barge used to say you can't exercise health into a sick body. It doesn't work like that, and it's true. You look at professional athletes, even racehorses. In our country, we have you know, the Triple Crown, these three races, the big races that go on, the Kentucky Derby, and those. There is not a horse in the Kentucky Derby that isn't under chiropractic care. I mean, even for the horses, they all are. They just are. Every boxer that steps into a ring for a world championship, they're under chiropractic care. Every basketball player in this country, every team of our NBA has a chiropractor on staff. The NFL has chiropractors on staff, and I'm sure the soccer leagues in you know in Europe they all have chiropractors that are part of their staff to help determine, you know, keep people finely tuned, because you can't exercise better skills into an athlete if they're subluxated as well as you can if they're not. And it's not just my viewpoint. That's the viewpoint of every major athlete in the world. they get to that level. So many athletes have said that they couldn't be the athlete they were. Michael Jordan, I mean, names
Yeah.
that we all know if it wasn't for chiropractic. So that outside in approach even applies to exercise. You're not getting as much out of even that if you're carrying an interference to the normal function of your body.
Yeah.
So medically, they want to force that chaos to order. What they see as order is not having a symptom.
Yeah.
So basically, they want to pull that battery out of the fire alarm, and then everything's good because the noise has stopped. Because you were complaining about you were getting a headache from this noise, and now there's no noise, so now your headache is better. Isn't that great? Well, if I have a brain tumor, I want to have a headache. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to be forced to find an answer. In that sense, from chiropractically, we see everything as order, whether someone is expressing health or whether they're expressing less health, on that continuum of health from being optimal function to death. No matter where you're at on that, except for the very end of death, we see there's order in it. And the fact that things die, there's an order to that. There's a reason for it. It's not a mystery. People don't, well, now I see, I don't know much about, I'm not following a lot of the COVID stuff now about these people dying. I don't really have any data that I've looked at myself, so I don't really want to get into that. But there's order, there's a reason for that. It's not a mystery. There's no mystery illness. There's always a reason that someone is expressing less health. And that's our view. There's coordination going on in the body. We have that coordinator, that conductor of the orchestra, so to speak, of all the tissue cells of our body that's coordinating everything, that innate intelligence. It's a term we use as chiropractors so that we can have a conversation and know what we're talking about. BJ said each human being is born into this world because of a constant, irresistible, intelligent force, working to a definite plan, designed to a definite pattern, all of which is constant. There's a reason. Everything happens in our bodies for a reason. There's no mystery. And the great black hole theorist, astrophysicist, the great physical physicist mind, Stephen Hawking, in a Millennium Evening, this is Bill Clinton, so this is quite a few years ago, around 2000, he had these Millennium Evenings, and he brought in brilliant people to have discussions, and there would more brilliant people in the audience that would ask questions. And someone asked Stephen Hawking about chaos, and he said, chaos does not exist in the universe. Man creates chaos. And I found that to be a really interesting point that he's making. And, when we see something that doesn't make sense, there's usually people involved in causing it to happen. Why would the peregrine falcons lay eggs that just crushed? That doesn't make sense. Well, it was the DDT that we fed the rodents, and it's there's always a reason. So, we look at our view in chiropractic kind of like that iceberg. They say an iceberg sunk the Titanic, which is that piece we think of as sticking out of the water. It was because of that giantness of what was underneath it that little piece sticking out was able to sink the Titanic. There's a lot more to chiropractic if we dig, if we look into it. But chiropractic philosophy only matters if we can use it. If to talk about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, who cares? In that sense, from what we do, we're more interested in things that we see. We want to have a rationale to address someone. When someone comes in and sits in that chair across from us and talks to us about their health experience, we want to be able to understand that from a chiropractic perspective.
Yeah.
And we can run around on top of that snowy island up there, or we can reach beneath that water to see the bigness of what we sit upon. In chiropractic, there's a lot more to it. So, when we look at, now these are some of the specimens from Dee Dee's collection. I was allowed to take them out, and I took films of quite a few of them as well, which I can't find. I don't know what I did. I did it back in the 80s.
All right.
But I still have I have photographs, and this is one of the specimens there. Now, when you were a student back then, they may tell you in an anatomy class to go down to the specimens and find number 597 and write a paper about how that person's organs and tissues in their being was adapting to this circumstance. And so they were taught differently then. They were taught to look at this and think of what does that mean to their experience in life. Now, we look at why this happened. But if we look in closer, you can see in these curves, I don't know if you can see my mouse here or not. You can see these vertebrae, they're not square, they're wedge shaped. And that's Wolff's law. Wolff's law will, that compressive force will change the shape of a vertebra to it so it can adapt better. But you look at the spacing around those vertebrae, there's no eburnation, there's no spurring, there's no nothing. The disc spaces look, the spacing between the vertebrae, there's not a tremendous amount of damage to the facets. It's really not as unhealthy as we first thought, so a lot of that looks pretty good. The amount of stress that's going on here has to be tremendous because all the weight from here up on the body is transmitting through this. Why wouldn't it just be smarter just to fuse it? Well, if we can adapt the shape of that vertebra to carry that weight better, it takes the stress off. So it's really amazing. Here's another one. Now, this one looks more like a textbook. Look at that nice cervical curve, thoracic curve, lumbar curve. It's all there. That's very nice. But if we zoom in on this one, we can see there's problems here. And we've all seen, spinographs or films of our patients' spines we've taken where we go, whoa, when we put the film in the box, because we don't expect to see this. This is terrible. This is a system that isn't adapting in the same way. Now, I don't know what the stresses were that might have triggered this into being, but the straightness of a spine and the levelness of shoulders and all those things don't mean much if this is what they're carrying inside them. There's definitely a biomechanical problem. Their bodies actually caused, a complete fusion here at this level and a little bit here as well. And you can see it happening on the vertebra below. That doesn't happen overnight. We've all had people come in and go, well, I did something last Thursday. I've never had a problem before. And we see this film and we're thinking, your body's broken because it should have told you years ago you had a problem. But it is interesting. So if we look at how we adapt, I like to think of what I used to call Dr. Barge's cocoon. He used to talk about how, at the moment of my death, if you hermetically seal me in a cocoon, I will still rot because everything needed to rot me is already in me. And he's right. The bacterial levels in the body are extremely high, but it's a relationship they have. We know, like in this picture, the Escherichia coli, the E. coli bacteria, they find them in the margins of about 20 years ago. They started to find them in the margins of stomach ulcers. And so they said, that's what it is. It's the stomach ulcers are caused by these bacteria. We're going to give antibiotics for stomach ulcers. And that's when it started. It was around 2000. And they wiped out the bacteria. But one thing these bacteria do in your stomach, they're normally there anyway. What they do is when you eat, they trigger a chemical which triggers the satiation center in your brain that tells you you're satisfied. You can stop now. And so when you wipe these out, that trigger isn't there anymore. So, I'm not saying it causes all the eating problems people have. I don't know. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that normal function isn't there anymore. And it's there for a reason. It's when there's an imbalance, it's either a weak host when these bacteria overgrow, so to speak. It's either the host can't keep them in check. There's a lot of things that, could some antibiotic resistance and all. There are bacteria that can only live in your system. They're vancomycin dependent bacteria. They can only live in your body if you're taking vancomycin, which is a very strong antibiotic. They feed on it because they've adapted to that. So bacteria are the thing. And I mentioned before how, here's the medical man with his esteemed look on his face, spouting his diagnosis into the funnel of chiropractic analysis, and it comes out plus minus. And it's not to say that people don't have the symptom of diarrhea, but they're secondary. There's a bigger problem involved. Why do you have diarrhea? Well, if you take this medication, it's like putting a cork in your rear end. Your diarrhea will be stopped. Well, why did you have diarrhea in the first place? Could it have been a normal thing? If we went out for if I was there with you today and we had dinner tonight and there was something, we get ptomaine poisoning. I want to have diarrhea. I want to
Yeah,
have
for
vomiting. I
sure.
want to have those symptoms. I don't want, the last thing I want is somebody to put a cork so I so I have to keep those toxins in my body. You know, it's assumed that anything that isn't, you know, symptom free is abnormal, is part of the problem we have in our culture today, because people will have a secondary symptom like that and they'll say, oh, I don't want to have that. You know, we see people now today with their fingers will be doing this little pill rolling movement while they're sitting there talking to you, and I know that they take antidepressants,
Yeah.
and it's always the case. They have, I can't think of that, tardive dyskinesia. Tardive dyskinesia is caused by taking antidepressants. But now they have a medication for tardive dyskinesia, and they even say in their commercials here in the United States, which we have all over our television sets, that, you know, if you have tardive dyskinesia, here's a medication. You know, if you have tardive dyskinesia from taking a medication, I mean, that's what they're saying. It's absolutely nuts, the direction we go. So, you know, if people need these medications, that may or may not be true. But what also is true is, if you get rid of, you know, to take something to treat a medication caused by a medication, it just seems kind of counterintuitive to logic. So medically, there's thousands. Chiropractically, there's the two we talked about, plus or minus. You know, there's an imbalance between the source, that mental impulse supply to a tissue cell, or something interfering with it, with the expression of the tissue cell. Now, part of that can be that you didn't pick your grandparents very carefully. You know, some people are going to be diabetics. That's all there is to it. There's nothing that can be done for them because, you know, or these children with cystic fibrosis. I don't care how often you adjust them; they still have cystic fibrosis. That it's a genetic issue. You're not going to change that. But you can change some of that secondary, you know, some of
Yeah.
those secondary things that we see. So this is a study they did at Harvard University. Each of these pieces of wood is 50% narrower, 50% shorter, and 50% thinner than the one ahead of it. And I don't know if you can see how small this gets down here. This little
Yeah.
tiny one. So what they did in this experiment is they just pushed that tiny one over, and that big thing at the end fell over. And this is kind of reminds me of the way we look at symptoms. People hear this last board hit the ground and they want something done about that, but they didn't even notice this first problem. You know, that person with that spine we showed, with all that damage that had been done to it over decades and decades, they heard the last board fall. They didn't hear anything up to that point, and it's kind of unfortunate. But the cause isn't of the last board, isn't the board in front of it. It's the board all the way to the bottom. You know, that's the cause. But they don't address cause. They address that noise that board made when it hit the ground. That's what they're concerned with, because that's something you're aware of. We got to get rid of that. So chiropractic should be focusing on finding the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause. And from our perspective, if we're going to look in that direction, but in reality, we're more interested in where that departure from health took place.
Yeah.
You know, where did that take place? And what we do as chiropractors is look for an interference to the proper supply of mental impulses through the nerve system due to a subluxation, where a medical doctor looks for a way to make a chemical change, and or a surgical change, and a psychologist looks to make a suggestive therapy change. So we understand the same thing, we just address it differently. So, you know, my job as a chiropractor is to look for an interference to that caused by a subluxation. So medicine is, of course, looking at the other end of this stack, and it really comes down to whether patients want to feel better or perceive better. You know what I mean? Do they want to not have the headache, or they want to be able to perceive their internal and external environment better? That really should be where our goal is, because if we can perceive and adapt to our internal and external environment, that's optimal health. That's as good as it's going to get. And it's just depending on how we look at that. You know, perceiving better should be our goal, not you know, not from a secondary symptom viewpoint. Yeah. So that informational disconnect. Now, this is from 1998, December 1998. I was at the Department of Education hearings in Washington, D.C., which, what was that, 24 years ago. And they asked the panel who decides about chiropractic education for the Department of Education, they said, well, what is chiropractic? And I thought, these are the people that are going to decide how our education's. And Bill Dallas, who was then the president of Western States, and he was also the president of the CCE. This is a quote from what he said. I have the transcripts. And it said, but basically what it amounts to is there's a relationship between the structure of the human body, the nerve system, and function. It needs a great deal of research, but we have a very strong anecdotal body, but we need a great deal of clinical data to substantiate some of the contentions that many of us hold. That's his definition of chiropractic. I know everybody wants to make a screenshot of that so you can put a poster on your wall so everyone that comes to see you goes, what? Because it doesn't make any sense. It's just word salad. And that's the problem. This was the head of our Council on Chiropractic Education that oversees all the schools in the United States. They couldn't define chiropractic. This is a problem. This is the very first edition of the Journal of Chiropractic Medicine that National College of Chiropractic puts out. And you can see they spelled medicine wrong. So Dr. Barge used to say, not only did they not know what it is, they can't even spell it. So it's unfortunate. And, we have, chiropractors out there that are, getting us to go off in these strange directions. This is from a few years back, of course, but another look at the prostate. This, of course, would upset a lot of people, but I really feel that there's some chiropractors that are qualified to examine prostates because they stare at their own. You have to be very confused to think this is what we should be doing as chiropractors. If you think someone has a prostatic problem, send them to someone who does this for a living. They're very good at it. Feeling a fake prostate in school does not qualify you to do this, and it shouldn't. It's not our job. Number one, philosophically, it makes no sense for us to do it. But even from a practical standpoint, if you think someone needs to have this checked, send them to someone that does this for a living. Who looks at that type of thing. It doesn't make sense for us. So we look at chiropractic defined this way. It's a philosophy, science, and art of things natural, a system of adjusting the segments of the spine by hand only for the correction of the cause of dis-ease. There's three things in this that kind of mess with us. Of things natural, by hand only, and dis-ease. And if we define those and explain why those were in the definition in the first place, it really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I did that here. I did. So of things natural was to separate us from the supernatural, saying that it's not a religious view. Okay. It's not to say that anything that's natural, I take bee pollen because it's natural, whatever. That's not what it means. Because syphilis is natural. That doesn't, that saying anything that's natural is part of chiropractic is not what this is about. This term was put in there and defined by them this way, and explaining this definition that it was to separate us from the supernatural, that it's not a miracle. We don't look at that way. There's no such thing as a chiropractic miracle. There's laws of cause and effect, which is principle 17. There's the laws of cause and effect, that every effect has a cause and every cause has an effect. By hand only. This was to separate us from surgery. There was a viewpoint at the time in the surgical world, well, maybe they can learn to correct this subluxation, and they should be doing it instead of us. So to separate from them, we said by hand only. It doesn't mean you can't use an upper cervical technique that uses like AO or Atlas orthogonal or something. That's not what it means. What it means is it's not surgical. And for the correction of cause of dis-ease, and if you study our principles down around principle 30 in that area, those couple of principles, you'll see that the term dis-ease is used to describe an incoordination of a system of the body, of tissue cells of the body, caused by a subluxation. So that specific incoordination only caused by a subluxation we call dis-ease. It was just to separate us so we can have a term to talk about. Granted, it's probably not the best term because it's a little too close to disease. So if we substitute those words in, this is what it says. Chiropractic is a philosophy, science, and art of a non-religious nature. No one's going to disagree with that. That just makes sense. A system of adjusting the segments of the spinal column without the use of surgical means. Who'd argue this?
Yeah.
For the correction of incoordination caused by a vertebral subluxation. There's no one in our profession that could really launch a valid argument against any of this. It just makes sense once it's defined in a way that makes it easy for us. And we hear people talk about how we need a definition of chiropractic today that's operational. Or not just chiropractic, but of subluxation. the definition of subluxation is operational. We'll probably save that for another time. But if we look through history, you know, things have a way back, and here we're over here, now we're over here, and 50 years now we're over here again. If we look back in time to 350 BC, look to the spine as its function is crucial. 1000 AD, say this prayer. 1850, that prayer is superstition, drink this potion. 1910, that potion is snake oil. Here, swallow this pill. That pill is ineffective. Take this antibiotic. And today, we're back to look at the spine as its function is crucial. And I can support that statement with thousands of studies that support our views of chiropractic and interference to the nerve system being a vital role. And when I say 350 BC, that of course goes back to Hippocrates, who made this point. One or more vertebrae of the spine may not go out of place very much. They may give way very little. And if they do, they are likely to produce serious complications and even death if not properly adjusted. Now, that's the father of medicine. I'll be damned. You know, I mean, they had an understanding of some sort at that time. And as chiropractors, many of us have seen the drawings of Hippocrates where he used a fence, and he had a post hooked to the fence, and he would have a person lay on this table, and he would use this post as a lever and pull down on it across their spine to try to correct this. Excuse me. So, you know, time has changed and time hasn't changed. Medicine may make people powerless because there's nothing you can do. I have to fix you. I will fight the virus. Go sit down. Chiropractic will say it's about the internal resistance of the person. They do the healing. You really should try to raise your resistance if you're worried about COVID. That would make a lot more sense. Get back on the bike trail. Try to take better care of yourself. Get to the chiropractor. Make sure there's no interference to your system, so you can get the most out of the nutrition you eat or the exercise you get. Because if you're subluxated, it doesn't make logical deductive sense that you're going to get as much out of that nutrition or as much out of that exercise as you might otherwise.
Yeah.
Medicine's profit driven. Chiropractic, at least we should be purpose driven. What we do should be the most important thing about what we are. I always had a hard time in my practice. I could come to your practice and I could talk up you and your practice like crazy. I could load your reception room. But for my practice, I'm uncomfortable with that. It makes it sound like I'm talking about me, and I don't want to do that. What I realized one day is I don't have the right not to explain chiropractic to people because it may make a change in their life or their child's life or someone they know that's monumental. I just had a little boy come in. When did he come in? Wednesday night. They come about an hour and a half, and I haven't seen him in a number of years, actually 10 years. Not close to 10 years, eight years or so. They live quite a ways away, but he came in, and when I first saw him, he was 2 years old, and he was paralyzed. He couldn't use his legs, and he would sit and he would just rock, trying to balance like this, and he couldn't bring his hand to his mouth. He was just a little blob, and he couldn't speak. His parents, out of desperation, his uncle said, bring them to me. And they brought him in to see me. And I checked him and I adjusted him. And we walked out into the reception room, and his dad set him back on the ground. And I'm watching him out of the corner of my eye. And this kid's sitting still. He's not weaving anymore. And I didn't say anything. I said, now, does he do that all the time where he's rocking like that? He said, constantly. He never stops. If he's awake and he's upright, it's like he can't balance. He's trying constantly, where your body adapts. That's how you balance.
Yeah.
It doesn't go pull to the left, no, pull to the right, no, pull to the left, too much. And that's what his body was doing. It could not get that concept of dealing with gravity. And, I think it was Roger Sperry who had the Nobel Prize in medicine for discovering that 90% of the effort of the brain is just to relate us to gravity. So think of how bad off this kid was if he couldn't relate to gravity. Well, now he's just sitting there. So I said, does he do that all the time, rock like that? He goes, yeah. I go, just like that? And he turned and looked at me. He said, yeah. He goes, wait, he's not doing it anymore. And by the time they got home, he could feed himself. They had some little cereal in a bag, and he could feed himself. And by the time he came back for his second visit a week later, he was starting to use his legs. By the time he left that day, he could walk. And by the time his third visit, I have a video of him running around our office. Chiropractic didn't do that. His body did that. So to me, if you're withholding, if you're uncomfortable explaining chiropractic in your community, get over yourself. It's not about you, it's about them. You're not doing it for you. Do it because that child is in someone's home in your community and they don't even know to have you check that kid. These people, every time I see them, they thank me up and down. I see the parents periodically because they live quite a ways away. And they thank me every time they come in for giving them their child back. And it's very sad that, you know, and I explain to them every time, it's not me. I go into the fuse panel of his home and I check a switch. I go, that switch isn't where it should be. And I set the switch and you think I cured him. I didn't fix your air conditioner. That's not how it works. Your body does. You know what I mean? It's that same concept. So, disease is the center of their model in medicine. Health is the center of our model. That to me is the biggest difference. If you see health as the thing, they've lost health. People don't get sick, they lose health. They lose the ability to deal with a bacteria or lose the ability to deal with a virus. They lose that ability. They're weakened in that ability to deal with it. Medicine, you're a rubber stamp. Everybody's the same. You know, we talk about the individual. In medicine, you have no voice. We'll tell you what you need to do. In chiropractic, the patient is the solution. Inside them is the answer. We remove an interference to the normal function in the body, that healthy function, what's supposed to be happening. They're parts focused. In medicine, you could be a nephrologist and only deal with kidneys. You could be a pulmonologist and only deal with lungs, a cardiologist and deal with the heart and the blood vessels. And actually, they don't even deal with all the blood vessels. You know, there are people that just deal with blood vessels. So they're parts focused. And in chiropractic, we're person focused. We look at the totality of that person. We consider them that way. Medicine's very linear. If I give you this blood pressure medication, your blood pressure should go down. If I take it away, it'll go back up. If I give it to you, it'll go down. If I take it away, it'll go back up. And it's just boop, 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 boop. In chiropractic, it's nonlinear. When you give that adjustment, you may never see that blood pressure go back where it was again. You cannot give them adjustment the next time they come in. Their blood pressure may just be fine still. Do you see what I mean? That's that. It's nonlinear. When we give an adjustment, or when you give a medication for that matter, because they're living, adapting things, you can't predict the outcome. It's nonlinear. And medicine thinks everything's linear. That's why there's such a thing as side effects. You know, those are effects. They're not side effects. So we have to build our foundation. And, you know, Chris Kent, you know, who I'm sure most of the people listening to this know very well, you know, he really boiled it down to what his chiropractor explained 4 things to him, and I really liked it. And I like Christopher. He's a very smart individual and just a great, well respected in every corner of the profession, and just a good person. And we chatted a little bit yesterday online, but I'm going to use his 4 explanations because I think it's something that everybody could do. Number 1, the body's self-healing. The body heals itself. If you cut a limb of a tree, a living tree, it heals. If you cut a limb off a dead tree, nothing happens. That's the difference. Life heals. The living thing, that living tree can heal itself. And I'm not saying the tree has a soul or the tree is religious. See, it's not like that. It's not that type of a thing. It's just that living things can adapt and heal. The tree has to adapt to that. If it just keeps pumping sap out of that open wound, you know, I mean, that's not what it's supposed to do. So it seals it, heals it, and it moves forward. In America, we had a commercial a few years ago for Neosporin, which is this some kind of stuff you spray on a cut and it helps cuts heal faster. You know, that was their commercial tagline, and it made me crazy. I hated that commercial because you know, it's absurd to me. I would like to do what I would call the $1 million challenge. I want to challenge Neosporin to a heal off. Let's go down to the morgue and we'll wait for a nice fresh body to roll in. It can still be warm. And then when it rolls in, we'll take that thumb web right here and we'll take an envelope and we'll just pull that envelope across that thumb web and give them a paper cut in this hand and a paper cut in this hand. And we'll spray some of that garbage in one hand and we won't do anything to the other one. Which one's going to heal faster? Nothing's going to happen because they're no longer alive. Life heals. Life is that ability to adapt. And when that's gone, we're gone. We cease to exist. I use the example in our office about that sunflower in the windowsill. I like a sunflower. I keep one in my windowsill and I like to look at it. So I turn it to face me in my office. Well, I go see some patients. I come back. Well, somebody moved my plant. Now it's looking out the window again. So I turn it again. And it keeps doing that until what? Until it dies. When it dies, I can turn it any damn direction I want and it's not going to move, because life is that ability to adapt. And when we lose that ability to self-heal, it's over. So that's number one. We can get that point across to people. That's not difficult. And there's someone, you know, I put a drug dealer in the corner of the screen. I know that wasn't the appropriate image, but it just seemed to fit. So what limits the restoration of health? You know, I mentioned before, and this is a Reggie Gold quote, if you want to live a long, healthy life, choose your grandparents very carefully. Because yes, there are limits. Tissues have limits. They can only adapt to a certain degree. You know, there are like my fingers. I could take this finger and I can bend it here, you know, whoops, this way. Now, most people can't do that. I know that. And my fingers can bend backwards. I know most people's don't bend that way, but that's probably, oh, there you go. Well, and that's probably something that you know, is genetically passed through my family. I really don't know, because I hate to say this, but 3 of my 4 grandparents were dead before I was born. So that doesn't bode well for me. So I have to make sure that I'm as free of interference as I can be to keep on this earth as long as I can. So matter matters. What we're made of matters. You know, we can't guess at someone's potential. We don't know. You know, there are people who've been diabetics, been at the chiropractor's office, and they're published and they're no longer diabetic. This happens. It doesn't happen to everyone. Every child who's paralyzed, who's been to a chiropractor, doesn't walk. Not everyone does. We don't know what their potential is, but what we don't know, we shouldn't guess at. We should explain to people that you know how that works. There's limits to what we can see, and we don't know what those are. Momentum is a thing. Dr. Barge used to say, you know, when a train is speeding along, you don't jump out in front of it and say stop. It doesn't work like that. There's a momentum of that train. It takes time, and that's exactly the point. You know, sometimes people have such momentum with a problem that healing is it's not an event. You know, it's a process, which means it's going to take some time, and you know, it's hard to predict. So, number 2, the nerve system is the master system of the body. The nerve system is that controlling conduit that carries that information to the tissue cells of the body. All function is controlled through that conduit. Conduit, is that a word in your?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know for sure. So all function is controlled through that conduit. We perceive our external and internal environment through that conduit. We know what the chemical function is, how much acid is in our stomach. Well, not consciously, but subconscious or super consciously, innate intelligence has an understanding of how much acid needs to be developed in our stomach, or to not develop at this point, to keep that pH level where it needs to be. So our internal environment and our external environment, our pupils constrict and dilate. You know, if a tiger jumps out behind a bush, your heart rate picks up before you take your first step. And it's a damn good thing, you know, because you would probably pass out and fall on your face if it wasn't for the fact that your heart rate. So all that happens through the conduit of the nerve system. We regulate our emotions, and psychophysiologists are doing more research that aligns with chiropractic and what we would consider in science the autonomic nerve system function, and you know, the conduit, than anyone right now. And it's all about emotions. It's all about, you know, everything people are dealing with from that perspective. All of that is related and regulated through the conduit of the nerve system. Our cognitive abilities, that ability, you know, they've done studies, and you know, the people who have trouble concentrating, that start to read a page and they get to the bottom and they're like, nuts, I wasn't paying attention, I have to read it again. You know, we've all done that, some of us more than others. And they've done studies and shown that has to do with your ability to adapt. When your ability to adapt decreases, your cognitive abilities drop with them. You know, in optimal health, you can't have optimal health without regulation through the mental impulse supply, through the nerve system. So it's the master system of everything. And if people can comprehend that, BJ Palmer said it much more simply. He said every organ in the body is connected to the one under your hat. You know, so a little simplistic, but it's the same point.
Yeah.
Masha and Dasha. I don't know if everyone's familiar with Masha and Dasha, but they should be. I've often said if people can understand the point behind Masha and Dasha and the Clearview Clinic in Davenport, Iowa, that used to handle the mental problems people had from a chiropractic perspective, if they could see the logic of those, there's nothing we couldn't explain to these people. So if they could understand this. Now, Masha and Dasha were what they used to call Siamese twins. And they call them Siamese twins because the original ones that were discussed were Yang and Chang from Siam. And that's why they call them Siamese twins. And anyway, but Masha and Dasha couldn't be separated. They had the only systems that were completely separate in them were the nerve systems. They had two separate spines. I'll show you here, two separate spines and nerve systems. So every level of their spine controlled, like their upper thoracics and of course the vagus nerve control the function of the heart, for instance, and the lungs and those types of things. So that was all separate. You know, they're connected, but their organs were supplied by their own separate nerve systems, the conduit, and they got sick separately. So if you think about that, one of them would have a childhood disease and the other one wouldn't. They shared a bloodstream. If the seed is the problem and not the soil, why didn't the other one get sick if they're sharing a bloodstream? If a patient or our community can understand that point, what is so hard about explaining the rest of chiropractic to them? And that's not hard to understand. It's factual. It's reality with these two. You know, why does my kid have my kid's got another ear infection? Is it the left ear again? Yeah, it's the left ear again. Why is it never the right ear? If it's caused by bacteria, why is it, or virus, whatever, why is it never the right ear? Well, because that's the unlucky ear. Really? That's real scientific, you know? It's because that ear can't protect itself, can't function the way it's supposed to, that it can't perceive the threat in that ear. Or the tensor vela palatini, which is the smallest muscle in the body, which covers the opening of the eustachian tube in the back of the throat, has the wrong tone in it. Because if it has the wrong tone, it covers that opening, and now pressure builds up in the ear, because 70% of ear infections are sterile. There's no bacteria, there's no virus, there's no nothing in there. So it's that pressure that they're perceiving. So, you know, the idea that antibiotics, you know, are needed for that, it seems counterintuitive. So number 3, interference to the nerve system. This one's a little wordy. May therefore, number 1, compromise your physical well-being. Well, that just follows. That's not a difficult thing to understand. If it runs everything and there's an interference to it, how can you be as healthy as you were? How can you reach your optimal health with that interference? It doesn't make sense. It's deductively impossible. And deduction is an example of formal logic. And formal logic is the only thing that can arrive at factor proof. Science can never reach factor proof. It's impossible. So when they say, well, you can't prove a subluxation, we can, because it's a deductive thing. So also, it can have psychosocial effects as it distorts your perception of the world. It can affect what we talked about before, you know, our relationship to our environment. And our environment, part of that is other people. It limits our ability to respond to the environment, and that can be internal or external environment. And you see that in large numbers of people. You have a sick society. And that we can look at Clearview Clinic. They had a 40% success rate with schizophrenics and all of these things they saw, and it was nothing but chiropractic care. That was unheard of at that time. That was before they had lithium drugs and a lot of the things that they give people today. That wasn't even a possibility. So nothing came as close to chiropractic in helping people achieve a better function in their body, which was part of that is a psychological function. So when this happens to a big number of people, you have a sick society. The fourth one's very simple. What I do as a chiropractor is locate and correct the cause of that interference. That's my job. And technically, innate intelligence corrects the interference. We put a force, we set a force into that as specifically as we can, And like a judo move, that innate intelligence takes that force and sets that vertebra where it needs to be and removes that interference. And then you thank me for fixing your air conditioner, which I don't know anything about air conditioners. That's not my job, you know. Or my fish in my fish tank were kind of flopping around, and now they're all swimming better. Well, that's because that fuse panel switch ran the pump in your fish tank. I didn't even know you had fish. I didn't fix that. That's your body. Your house knew what to do. You know what I'm trying to say? That what's behind that, you know, that intelligence behind that knew what to do. They explained it this way in 1908. They used a peach tree, and they said if you interfere with what's coming through that branch to keep that peach healthy, it's not going to develop the way it's supposed to. What's the difference between that and an organ in your body? Well, and quite honestly, now we know 114 years later, they're right. We know that. Science is showing this. Here's BJ talking to some patients in his office, and you can see on his desk is the wet specimen there, and that which another time, another day. We have to deflect those outside in pressures. You know, there are people who want us to treat the symptoms, and we just have to be intellectually honest with people. That's not what we're capable of doing. You know, do we see that curve in that spine as pathology, or do we see it as architectural genius? It's absolutely incredible if that was able to happen. So when we see an adaptation in the body, that's not a pathological. A scoliosis isn't pathological. It's an adaptation that the body's trying to adapt to a bad situation. You know, do we see that snowy island, or we understand the totality of that iceberg? That's what we need to do as chiropractors. I'm going to give you just a little parting thing from someone who knows better. And can you hear that?
No.
Oh, let me. Oh, I apologize. Let me stop that. Then it's a video. It's an audio of Dr. Barge, and what he's saying is, what he's basically saying is, you know, that people come to us in the tattered. He doesn't use these words, but in the tattered garb of fear. They're cloaked in this tattered garb of fear because medicine is all fear-based. You know, the virus is going to get you. This is going to happen. You know, there's nothing you can do. And you know, health is done to you, or, you know, treatment of disease is the thing. And it's all fear-based. If you don't do what we tell you to do, oh, well, if I do have this surgery, you'll be responsible then. Well, I'm not saying that. Don't talk crazy. You know, I mean, so it's all from that perspective. They come to us in those tattered garbs of fear because they've been in that model so long, and they don't know there's something else out there. What we never should ever touch in those people is hope, because we don't know what outcome they may have. Did I think I've had 14-year-old, I've had someone as old as 14 walk for the first time after an adjustment. Did I know that was going to happen? Of course I didn't know that was going to happen. But that you know, that child deserved to have the opportunity for restored health. And as long as they're subluxated, they can't be healthy. They can't be truly healthy. There's always another degree to reach towards the optimum level. And that's really what he's saying is, don't touch their hope. Leave it alone. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to them. So that's really his point. So I'll end with this quote from BJ. And you see BJ here explain the principles of chiropractic using.
Now your sound went away.
I don't know what happened here. It says my microphone.
Now
okay. Yes. All right. I don't know what happened. Okay. So you see BJ here explaining the principles of chiropractic using this doll with the little girl. And that's how simple it is. A child can understand those four things we just talked about. And I appreciate Dr. Kent for sharing the simplicity of those points with me. Now, BJ said it this way, and here's the challenge. There's no difference in the voir de pas between Henry Ford, Steinmetz, or any of the so-called great men who achieved great accomplishments, and you, this other fellow, or any other chiropractor. All weigh relatively and comparatively the same on a scale. The difference lies in length, breadth, and depth of mentality, vision, and effort to put forth to do things. Step up yours, and you equal Henry Ford or the other fellow. How to step up, begin. And that's what our job is as chiropractors, and to look at the opportunity we have to help someone change their life and improve where they are. There are people that think there's nothing that can be done for me. And that's tragic that they're in our community. That's a failure on us.
Yeah.
Because we decided not to tell them what we know about chiropractic. We don't do that for us to build our practice. I suppose at some level that's important. But at the same time, if we know in our minds that removal of an interference to the system is going to help them, what right do we have not to explain it to them? So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to cover. I think we're pretty close to an hour. So
wonderful.
I hope that was, at least a little entertaining. I'm sorry about that audio. It played on my speakers here instead of through the internet. I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Another day, another time.
Yeah, exactly. And this was such a delight. And I do look forward. I mean, this is one day before the end of 22. And I do hope we can do more 23. And I also do hope we can get you over to Sweden again. I know that you enjoyed it greatly when you were here. Yeah,
I would love that. It's a beautiful country. I would absolutely love that.
Yeah,
and there's so many great people, great chiropractors there, and all through Europe. And it's nice to me to see things like social media, so we get to know each other better, because I'm amazed at some of what I see in different parts of the world, some of the great chiropractors that are out there that I never knew existed. So it gives us an opportunity to share with each other, and I'm always looking forward to that. But in 2023, let's right now make that resolution to do a better job of explaining the simplicity of chiropractic to people, and challenging ourselves to reach a little bit beyond what we think we're capable of. Because once you see you're capable of explaining things a little better, you can never again believe you can't do it. So onward and upward.
Wonderful. And I do everybody that's haven't read your books, but I only brought the philosophy book with me out where I'm now, but the adaptability book and this book. Is there any other book out there now?
Technically, no. Let's just say no. Those two, yeah. That's
it's a wonderful. I think this should be every chiropractic student, every chiropractor should read this.
It's out in Spanish now, and I have a French edition that I'm hoping will come out this spring. So slowly but surely, I want to make it easy for people to understand. Because philosophy is not hard. It's very simple. Why should we make it hard? Sometimes I think we over-explain things or get too detailed. And I think to get the major points of what we do as chiropractors across helps all of us and move forward. So I appreciate what you're doing for Europe and the great chiropractors over there. And I look forward to shaking your hand, thanking you properly soon.
Me too. And I'll put your contact details below in the video, and also the link for those that wants to get your book from Lulu. I think it is, yeah.
That's fine too. But if anybody has a question, please ask me. I'm always glad to help.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I'll end the video and recording for now. Let's see there we have it.